And welcome into the Golden State Media Concepts Football Podcast. My name is Anthony. Jeremiah is not here today. It's okay. I got you taken care of. So we're going to start off really quickly with Marshawn Lynch. Maybe Marshawn Lynch. We don't really honestly know if Marshawn Lynch is coming back, but there are reports out there right now that the Oakland Raiders are at least considering trying to acquire him, bring him out of retirement. If they get him, they have to trade him. Because now they're kind of without a workhorse running back, right? They basically had Latavius Murray. He's gone now. You still got Jalen Richard, and you still have Washington. You still have people on the team that produced for you last year, but now you have a situation where, since Marshawn Lynch is under an existing contract, he'd be in line for a $9 million salary cap hit in 2017 and 18. He would be due a base salary of $7 million. So Lynch still has some money left on his contract, but the Raiders can kind of the situation that they're in. They're looking to, all of a sudden bolster their offense, right? Because they brought in Jared Cook, right? They signed Jared Cook from the Green Bay Packers. They still have a really good offense with Derek Carr, who will be healthy by the time the season starts, right? Because unlike something like an ACL tear or some kind of ligament damage like that, he basically just, had his broken bone, which I say just a broken bone. I don't know if you've ever had a broken bone. It's not fun, but what I say just is that it'll be healed and everything will be back good as new once the season starts. So you have him a quarterback. You still got Amari Cooper, a wide receiver. You got Michael Crabtree as the backup. Jared Cook is your tight end. They're trying to basically solidify everything and get you a running back, right? Because Marshawn Lynch is one of the guys out there, and I wouldn't mind seeing Marshawn Lynch come back. Marshawn Lynch, when he was playing, was one of my favorite people to watch. He was somebody who, whether it was on the field or off the field, was always somebody that, he didn't really care what you said about him, right? Like, it didn't matter what was happening around him. It didn't matter what the media attention was swirling around him. He was always going to be his own guy, right? He was always going to be somebody that was going to do what he wanted to do no matter what. And to the surprise of some, last year he retired kind of abruptly, right? He just kind of all of a sudden out of the blue retired. Right now the man is 36 years old. He's going to be 30 years old. He's going to be 31 soon. Retired last year at the age of 29, and it would make sense. He was kind of hitting that, area anyways. And last year, or in 2015, I should say, he only had 417 yards rushing as compared to 2014 when he had 1,306 yards. So he wasn't the same guy, and he pretty much decided, you know what, I don't really need to do this anymore. I'm going to retire. And I don't know about you, Marshawn Lynch doesn't seem like the dude that once he makes up his mind about something that he's going to all of a sudden change it off of peer pressure or money or anything else like that. I don't think he's going to have any kind of concern when it comes to that, because it's not like the Raiders can come to us like, oh, we're going to pay you more money. No, that's fine. Oh, but, you should really do it for the team and stuff like that. Well, you're not my team. Like, it's not like the Seahawks are trying to ask him back. If anybody was going to try and convince him to come back, it would have been the Seahawks last year, because all of a sudden they started struggling running the ball, right? And you would figure that even though he didn't have a good year in 2015, he could have done something that would have gotten the team back in a better spot to, contend, because he was their guy and he was sort of their everything, right? Like, I understand Russell Wilson was having a good, start to his career, but that offense relied on him. That offense was run with him as the lead, offensive weapon. Forget about the lead back. He was like the thing that everything ran through. He was the one that, as long as he was having a good game and set up stuff for the play action passes with Wilson, it helped everybody around him, Doug Baldwin, Golden Tate, it helped everybody when they were there become better players. So I can't see Marshawn Lynch, A, coming out of retirement, and B, coming back to a totally different team, because forget about the fact that he didn't have a good year in 2015. Like I said, 417 yards. Forget about that for a second. He also just has been gone for a full year. There's like a three-prong thing to this, right? Number one, he didn't have a good year in 2015. Number two, he's a little bit older of a running back. He's going to be 31 years old, and that's not helping anything out. And number three, he's going to a different team. It's one thing if you're coming back to your old team and they're just like, okay, remember what you did back here? Okay, we're just going to need you to do that. We're going to need you to do it maybe in a little bit different way, but for the most part, it's the same thing as you've done in the past. No, man, this is totally different. This is him going to a totally new system with a totally new offensive line, with a totally new offensive coordinator, totally new head coach, totally new everything. And I can't really see him wanting to do that, right? Like I can't see him voluntarily coming out of retirement to play for that team. I understand that the Raiders are good, but so are the Seahawks, and if you're going to come back, you might as well come back to the team that you know that's just as good. And if we're being 100% honest, doesn't have to go through a hard of a schedule as the Raiders are going to have to do next year, because whoever they play outside of their conference or outside of their division, that division in the NFC West is not as good as it used to be. In that AFC West, when you got Denver, you have Kansas City, and even San Diego that has Phillip Rivers, who's going to compete every single time. That division's really hard. But the NFC West, I mean, the Rams, saw how bad they were last year, and the Cardinals, while they're pretty good, they're not any kind of a contender this last year, and it's hard to tell if they're going to make a bounce back year this year. And then you also have the 49ers, which that whole team, they went from so bad about 7 years ago to so good about 4 years ago to so bad again. It's just been a total peak and valley kind of decade for the 49ers. But you have the situation with Lynch, and you also have the situation with Adrian Peterson, who's still out there, right? He's still technically a free agent that nobody knows where he's going to go, right? There's been links to him with the Patriots because, of course, there's links with him and the Patriots. That's how this whole thing goes. He's always, a good player is always going to be targeted, quote unquote, or in rumors with the Patriots because they get everybody, right? Allegedly in the offseason, they get everybody. And even this offseason, they pretty much got everybody. But you have Adrian Peterson, who's still a free agent, might go to the Raiders, might go to the Giants, might go somewhere like that. You have Marshawn Lynch, and now with the Raiders, you have the situation where they basically just need that running back to be better. But the problem is the people that they're looking at are people who, if you were to ask the same question in 2013, fantastic, great. Everyone would have been happy with this. Let's go. But in 2017, maybe not the same thing. Now we're kind of looking at a little bit of a different thing with Marshawn Lynch because he now is a little bit older. Adrian Peterson's a little bit more injured. There's not exactly great options you have. I guess LeGarrette Blount would be somebody else that's out there for the Raiders to go and look at because it doesn't look like he's going to be brought back by the Patriots. And then you also have the situation in the draft. The Raiders have a decent enough draft pick where maybe they can get one of the running backs who's still left. Probably not Leonard Fournette, but maybe if McCaffrey drops, maybe if Dalvin Cook drops a little bit, maybe they can get one of the players like that. Still a little bit up in the air as far as what the Raiders are actually going to do. Still up in the air to see what Adrian Peterson is going to do. And like I said, you still have the LeGarrette Blount situation. But at least with the Raiders right now, they have some kind of a hope with that because, like I said, they did get Jared Cook, which does help solidify their offense, almost all the way. As far as defensively, they still got a little bit of work in progress with that. It is going to be interesting, though, with the Raiders because you still have the situation where you don't really know where they're going to play, right? Like, they could play in Oakland, or which I believe Bank of America is the one that's kind of getting involved in this whole thing now with Vegas. That's looking like that's going to come up again because also one of the things I forgot to mention with Marshawn Lynch, he's from Oakland, right? He went to Cal, had the whole thing where he was great at Cal, rode the medical card, everything else like that. Everyone loves him over in Northern California. But if they go over to Las Vegas, then what are you doing? For what? For who? Like, it has no kind of like emotional connection to him at that point. I get if you're trying to be the Oakland Raiders getting Marshawn Lynch because he's from Oakland. Cool, that's going to be awesome. That's going to be fun. I can at least understand why you want to do that. If it's in Las Vegas, I mean, he has no ties to Vegas. He just probably has been to Vegas because it's Vegas. And if you've ever been to Vegas, go to Vegas. But, it's not the same sort of emotional pull for Marshawn Lynch. But, you have the situation with Adrian Peterson because clearly that situation is donezo, right? Him in Minnesota, that's not happening anymore. They brought in Latavius Murray. He's going to be the lead back, even though his deal is basically something that they can get out after a year. But the GM's basically said, goodbye, Adrian Peterson. You've been a fantastic running back. You've been a fantastic leader for our organization. But with Murray now, with his $15 million deal over 3 years, Peterson is officially a free agent, which makes sense because he was kind of making those kind of clues known before because he would say things like, Adrian Peterson will always be a Minnesota Viking, which is basically the equivalent of saying, I don't want to be around this person, in an athletic standpoint anymore. Like, I don't want him to be the number one guy, but I still want to say good things about him, right? Oh, I'll always love her if you break up with somebody, right? It's like, oh, she'll always have a place in my heart. Yeah, that doesn't mean she has a place right now where you actually want to be with her. Oh, Adrian Peterson will always be a Viking. Well, that doesn't mean he's going to be a Viking this year. It's kind of one of those things that kind of said, and you kind of understood where they were going with it. Now with Murray being there, Adrian Peterson clearly and 100% will not be back there next year. Just a question of where he's going to go. So when we come back from the break, we're going to talk more as far as the NFL goes, but we're going to go a little bit different. We're going to go defense-wise. We're going to talk about Richard Sherman and the possibility that he isn't a Seattle Seahawk next year. Be right back in the Golden State Media Concepts Football Podcast.
Check out the show that's built on the MMA. From the UFC to extreme cage fighting, they got the fights covered. Check out the GSMC MMA podcast. Get the latest news on past or upcoming fights. Join us as we talk to and about some of the biggest names in the MMA, past, present, and future. When it's the fight game, there's just one show to check out. GSMCpodcast.com/MMA-podcast. Don't forget to like them on Facebook and follow them on Twitter. Visit GSMCpodcast.com for more info.
And welcome back to the Golden State Media Concepts Football Podcast. Okay, so last segment we talked about the Oakland Raiders and the situation they have with either going to sign Marshawn Lynch out of retirement or they're going to go Adrian Peterson. So now, kind of, I guess, sticking with the Seattle Seahawks, we're going to talk about Richard Sherman, right? The current cornerback for the team. He is someone who, they're starting to get the whole, not trade rumors, but, the whole situation where it's like, well, he's available if you want him, kind of thing like that. Just kind of like testing the waters, right? Because he still has value as far as Richard Sherman goes. He's still somebody who, isn't past his prime. Like, this isn't the Darrelle Revis situation where all of a sudden Richard Sherman isn't going to be what you'd hoped he would be. And he's, not a necessarily young player, but he's 28 years old, been in the league a little bit, still top 5 cornerback in the league. And he's, sort of become available. I do a sports podcast with Ben earlier on, and he floated the scenario of, well, what if he goes to the Patriots? And look, man, here's the thing. If he goes to the Patriots, I'm here for anarchy, and I'm here for chaos with certain things when it comes to sports, right? I kind of love that in a certain degree, right, because it's kind of one of those funny things. I always love the University of Miami teams. I always love kind of those, UNLV basketball teams. The teams that are just kind of like really, really good, but also really, really chaotic, and it's just like, how did this happen kind of thing, right? Never anything to the bad degree, right? But still just kind of a funny thing of how everything's going about it. If Richard Sherman goes to Seattle to New England, if he goes from there to there, I don't understand how any team in the NFL is not going to look at that and be like, how did they get them? Like, they just signed Gilmore basically from the Bills. They still have Butler on the team, although he might go to New Orleans for a first-round pick. And you basically just replacing Malcolm Butler, who, by the way, won a Super Bowl for you against the Seattle Seahawks team, for Richard Sherman. And it's one thing if you give Bill Belichick a good player on defense. If you give him a great player, he can work wonders with that. And look at what he did with Darrelle Revis, who also, by the way, he got rid of before he had started to decline. And now Richard Sherman doesn't look like he's half the player that he used to be. And you have all these situations that are out there right now in the NFL. I see up over here, they just signed Jason Pierre-Paul to a 4-year deal worth about, looks like $54 million contracts, about 17 of it's guaranteed, which is a nice thing for Jason Pierre-Paul. I'm actually happy that happened for him. He had the whole situation on 4th of July a little while back when he blew off his basically hand, still kept a couple of his digits, but he still basically blew off his hand. So good for Jason Pierre-Paul. I'll get back to that in a second. But as far as Richard Sherman goes, they said they'll do it for the right deal. And going back to the Seahawks, forgetting about where he goes, whether the Patriots or not, Seattle has basically gone from the Legion of Boom, right, where you had Richard Sherman, right, you had Brandon Browner at one point was on there, you had, I can't think of what the safety's name is right now, Cam Chancellor back there, you had Byron Maxwell at one point back there, and you had Earl Thomas. You had all of these guys who helped make the Legion of Boom what they were. Slowly, people have gone away. Brandon Browner wasn't on the team. Maxwell got paid over in Philadelphia. Then that didn't go as well. Browner's actually out of the league right now. And now you only have Earl Thomas, Richard Sherman, and Cam Chancellor on the team. And they're slowly eroding that defense from what it was. And one of the things that made that defense, made that team so good is the fact that you had so much, clearly, depth on that team, because Byron Maxwell, while he may not be good if he's your number one cornerback, he's good if he's kind of in a system, right? And slowly they're draining that away. And don't get me wrong, the team is still good, and the team is still good on defense, but we saw last year with Earl Thomas gone how much different that Seattle secondary was, how important he was to the team. And maybe you can replace Richard Sherman on that corner, on that secondary, but at the same time, you're slowly kind of eroding what this team was, because we've seen this with teams in the past, right? Like, we're in Sacramento right now doing this podcast, right? And the Sacramento Kings at one time, long time ago, were really good, right? You had Chris Webber, Paige Stojakovic, Mike Bibby, Bobby Jackson, Doug Christie, all these people on the team that made them really, really good and a title contender. But then slowly you started eroding the team. And it went from, like I said, Webber, Paige, and Bibby to Webber got traded away. And now the team wasn't as good anymore because you take away a really good player, still a good talent on the team, but now that team's just a little bit worse. And then all of a sudden you get rid of Paige Stojakovic, who had to step up once Webber left, but then once he leaves, now it's more pressure on Mike Bibby. Still a good team, but not a great team. Like, you're slowly eroding this team, right? And you went into a situation where you had all these good defensive players, but you're slowly eroding the team, right? Brandon Browner leaves. Cool. We got Byron Maxwell to replace him. Then you strip that away. Okay, no, that's fine. We still got Earl Thomas and Cam Chancellor and Richard Sherman. Okay, now if you take Richard Sherman out there, now you basically just keep making this team a little bit worse and worse and worse, right? All of a sudden, that depth that you had isn't the same thing. And for the NFL, sure, talent wins. I'm never saying talent doesn't win, but the other thing that wins the NFL is depth, because it's a sport where you're kind of constantly running. Like, yeah, there's breaks, but it's about you, especially on defense, being able to keep up with the other wide receiver on the team, right? Because if all of a sudden you're going against Julio Jones or A.J. Green or Brandon Marshall or somebody like that, you kind of got to keep up with them and understand what they're doing. And if you get tired because you don't have depth and you have to be relied on to keep going out there, that part's not going to be as good for you, right? Now all of a sudden that defense isn't as good. Now all of a sudden you're relying more on your offense, which is what Seattle did last year. They're relying more on their offense to help them out. And passing-wise, you're relying on Russell Wilson. And maybe he can kind of help this team out like that. But this team isn't what it was 4 or 5 years ago. And to be fair, NFL teams are never the same 5 years after the fact. Like, that's just how the NFL works. You kind of go for a few years, then all of a sudden your skills start to erode, and you get a guy who's younger, maybe not better, but he's younger and faster, and you kind of reload on the fly. For Richard Sherman, you know, it's something where I think they probably do keep him, because when they say for the right deal, that basically means, like, give us at least 1 first-round pick, maybe 2, kind of a thing like that, right? Because he's still worth it. He's only 28 years old. He's still worth that high of a value. Problem is, do you have the people that can make it come back to even? Do you have the people that you can rely on that will be the backups that can be starters? Clearly, like I talked about when I was joking about the Patriots, I wasn't really joking, just kind of talking about the Patriots. Clearly, Malcolm Butler, when he was the, not number one guy, once, Darrelle Revis was out for a second, and you said, oh, Malcolm Butler, he'll be fine, and then he started to step in to be the lead guy. Okay, so you saw that he could be that guy who is a backup who can be the starter. It's hard to tell if that's going to be the same thing with the Seahawks, especially if you got something like Earl Thomas joking about retiring, or at least, making it a possibility that he retires because he got the injury. And now you kind of see these players all around the NFL. You had Jordan Cameron, who recently retired from the Miami Dolphins, basically saying that he didn't love playing in the NFL. Like, yeah, it was fun and everything else like that, but he didn't love the game. Maybe you love Sunday and going out there and playing, but that doesn't mean you love everything else that goes around with football, because you also got to remember that it's kind of like a full week, full year kind of a sport, right? You can't just basically go out there every Sunday and do it. And for the Seahawks, whether this is a trade, whether they keep Richard Sherman or whatever, it's going to be interesting to see how much longer that they can actually be what they were, be that team that can keep going year after year after year. Because, like I said, this team has slowly been eroding over the last 3 or 4 years, whether it's Marshawn Lynch leaving, whether it's Golden Tate leaving, whether it's kind of adjusting to the offensive needs of the team when you brought in someone like a Jimmy Graham and you basically making now the passing game over focal point instead of the running game. whether it's the fact that you keep losing these players on defense, whether it's the fact that you got Michael Bennett, who is a really, really, really good player, but he's starting to get up there in age a little bit too, to where like he might all of a sudden leave the team, and you have all these little slow, I don't even want to call them cracks because it's not fair to call them cracks because the team is still really good. They're probably going to win the division, but that doesn't mean they're going to make it back to where they want to be, which is at least the NFC Championship game and more than likely the Super Bowl, where they have another shot of winning a ring to kind of make up for the one that they probably should have won against the Patriots. But with that being said, we're going to take another break of the Golden State Media Concepts Football Podcast. When we come back, we got a little bit more coming to the NFL. I'll talk about Jason Pierre-Paul and his deal a little bit more because I just kind of hit on that briefly. We'll talk about that a little bit more when we get back in the Golden State Media Concepts Football Podcast.
Tired of searching the vast jungle of podcasts? Now listen close and hear this out. There's a podcast network that covers just about everything that you've been searching. Hey! The Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network is here. Nothing less than a podcast bliss with endless hours of podcast coverage. From news, sports, music, fashion, cooking, entertainment, fantasy, football, and so much more. So stop lurking around and go straight out to the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. Guaranteed to fill that podcast itch. Whatever it may be. Visit us at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Follow us on Facebook and Twitter, and download us on iTunes, SoundCloud, and Google Play.
And welcome back to the Golden State Media Concepts Football Podcast. Real quick, before we get back, they always have these things because we're in the studio looking at the screens, whether it's on Undefeated or Undisputed, I should say, or First Take. They always have these weird things like, oh, who's better between X or Y? Like, is Russell Westbrook better than Kevin Durant? And I always think those things are kind of weird and contrived and things that just you put up for content because it's not, anything fast of a sports day. It's a really slow sports day. So it's like, oh, we're going to have these things. With Adrian Peterson being gone, they have this whole situation where it's like, oh, who was better, Adrian Peterson or Randy Moss? I love that so much, but that's my bias showing because Randy Moss is one of my favorite players of all time, and so is Adrian Peterson. So I see that, and all of a sudden my, smile goes up, and I'm like, oh, this is really cool. Yes, I want to see this. Doesn't really happen a lot with those two shows, but that just kind of, piqued my interest really quick just because they're two of my favorite players of all time, and I miss watching them in their primes, right? Not that I watched Randy Moss in his prime, but YouTube's the thing, and you can see him at his best. And when he was at his best, Randy Moss, whoo, and when Adrian Peterson was at his best, whoo, both of them just elite level talents. Anyways, so getting back to at least current NFL players, right? Jason Pierre-Paul, 4 years, $54 million, and 17 million of it is guaranteed, which congratulations for Jason Pierre-Paul, right? First off the bat, congratulations for Jason Pierre-Paul. He finally got his money that he kind of wanted. He still had a good year last year. Even with missing of some of his fingers, he still had a really good year last year. And you can make jokes about Jason Pierre-Paul and everything else like that, and I get it. Also, you have the situation where, he is basically trying to do everything he can to get back to what he was. Now, will he be what he was before that when he had 12.5 sacks? No, probably not. But he still had 7 sacks. Do you understand how impressive that is to get 7 sacks when you can't grab with your right hand the way you used to? That's really, really hard to do. So they gave him this money, like I said, 4 years, $54 million. But, like I said, 17 of it is guaranteed. And that part's not insignificant because, okay, it's 4 years, $54 million. Okay, so what does that round off to? A little over $13 million a year, right? So that basically says after year one, they can probably either cut him and not have to take that much of a cap hit, or they can trade him after that if he's doing well. There's ways you can get out of this for the Giants, right? I'm still not 100% sure of how it breaks down because it's literally is breaking right now, showing it on the screen. But with that said, it's good for Jason Pierre-Paul because he clearly showed that he's still a productive NFL player. Is he what he was before that? No, but he's also only 28 years old. He's still in the prime of his career. He's still somebody that can get you really good production. And with the Giants this year, we see what they did with Brandon Marshall, bringing him in to basically solidify the offense. You sign Jason Pierre-Paul right now to kind of get this defense kind of wrapped up and get it to where you want it to be, because that was one of the good things they had last year was where they started to slowly get that defense a little bit better. The offense was coming together. They didn't win the Super Bowl, obviously, but they're getting that team slowly a little bit better. And with Brandon Marshall coming in, they want to basically make sure that everything is going well, everything is basically looking up when the season finally does start. Now, you contrast that with another team in the NFC East and the Dallas Cowboys, and you have the person in Brandon Carr, right? He is somebody who was a very good player for the defense, even though that defense wasn't necessarily great in Dallas. He's gone. And slowly what you're doing in Dallas is you're slowly starting to erode even what was pretty decent with that team, right? That defense wasn't great, but it was at least something that you could, have a little bit of faith in to basically maintain the game, right? So Brandon Carr, he leaves right now. He's going over to Baltimore on a 4-year, $50 million contract, 4-year, $24 million contract. And the reason I bring up the Cowboys specifically is they've kind of eroded that defense to the point where now all of a sudden, because you lost 2 other members of the secondary. You lost safety Barry Church, who went to the Jaguars, and J.J. Wilcox, who went to the Buccaneers. And, okay, fine, that defense in Dallas wasn't good, but you still had a situation where you had people who you trusted and relied on, and forget about the fact that you had a full season from Lee, who you can't expect that to happen again. He's going to get hurt. All of a sudden, now that defense isn't as good. Now you have to put more pressure on the quarterback on the team because you have a good quarterback and you have a good running back. You got a good building blocks, right? All of a sudden, if Dak Prescott and Ezekiel Elliott can be the guy that you want them to be for the next decade, that part's great. But if you're losing everybody on defense that you kind of trusted and relied on, and don't get me wrong, like I said, I understand the Cowboys defense wasn't that good, so it's not like you're getting rid of a Richard Sherman or someone like that. But you're taking away the stuff that made you good. Because one of the things that you kind of have to do in the NFL is it doesn't matter if you have all-stars all throughout the roster. It matters if you have all-stars throughout the roster who are at good value and have depth on the team. So that way, if one of them goes down, you're still okay. And the last thing is, when I said good players with value, that matters most with the quarterback or running back or wide receiver, some of the key skill position players, which is what they have, right? They have a good running back for cheap. They have a good quarterback for cheap, but they're losing all these people around them. And now who knows the team's going to be as good, because this isn't insignificant either. The fact that while the defense is good, while the offense was great, you also have one of their offensive linemen free. He's gone. He retired. The defense is eroding away. And the NFC East that you're playing in, the Giants, we just talked about how good they are. Washington, while they lost a couple of good players on offense, you still got Kirk Cousins, who maybe he's not the number one quarterback in the nation. He's still probably a top 10 quarterback, maybe a little bit worse than that. Maybe he's 11, 12, 13, but he's still right in that top 10 range. And also in Philadelphia, maybe they take another step, right? Maybe Carson Wentz all of a sudden becomes a little bit better of a quarterback. Now you have real competition in the NFC East. And just because the Cowboys were really good last year, went 14-2, that doesn't mean they're going to do it again this year, right? What were they the year before that? 4-12. Maybe this 14-2 season was just a lucky season where everything went great for a quarterback because you didn't have that much pressure on him. Maybe, you had a good offensive line that helped Ezekiel Elliott, and maybe all of it starts to erode a little bit more with the Cowboys. And now you're getting rid of players left and right. It's a weird situation with Dallas because you basically are taking the people that made you good and basically saying like, oh, no, it's fine. You can go somewhere else. And I understand if certain things get too expensive for you, that's fine. But like I said, that's 3 players in the secondary that you have now lost from a defense that wasn't that good. Maybe you can replace some other people, but there's also a solid chance that this team gets a little bit worse. And in a league where, or in a division where the other teams are coming for you and are pretty good as well, there's no necessarily guarantee that the Cowboys come next year will make the playoffs, and then all of a sudden we can yell at Jerry Jones again and we can laugh at everything else like that. But in the meantime, now you have the situation where, Jason Pierre-Paul, like I said, gets his money, but the people on the Cowboys, they're losing their money. And one last thing I'm kind of interested to see with the NFL because, like I said, we're still in the situation where no one really kind of knows where anyone's going. You can have guesses about, maybe he goes here, maybe he goes there. you have the situation in New England where they're signing everybody that's good, and maybe Butler still is stay on the team, maybe he doesn't. But there's one player, because they're talking right now, with the NFL draft coming up, that is going to make things very difficult for teams around the NFL, because you have 3 running backs that are available, right, basically in the draft. You have Christian McCaffrey, you have Dalvin Cook, and you have Leonard Fournette. You have other good players as well, but those are kind of the 3 guys that people talk about the most. And I want to see what happens with, with LeGarrette Blount, because with him being a free agent and how valuable he is, I'm interested to see what happens with the money that he gets. And there's a reason why I say this. Was he the best running back in the league last year? No. He had over 1,000 yards, but it wasn't a lot over 1,000 yards, right? The thing he had was the touchdowns, right? And the reason why I'm interested in that is because I want to see how much teams value those certain things, right? Because obviously if you have 1,500 yards rushing, teams are going to sign you, right? That's just kind of the the way the game works. But for LeGarrette Blount last year, the man only had 1,161 yards rushing, but he had 18 touchdowns. So I want to see what his value is. And the same way the value wasn't the same thing for Fitzpatrick, how he put up good numbers and the teams around the league were like, I know this is a facade, this isn't the same thing. I want to see if teams go after LeGarrette Blount in the same way, because he's also 30 years old, but to have 18 touchdowns matters. And if he gets lowballed in the contract in the offseason, I want to see what happens, because I want to see if teams value the yards more or if they value the touchdowns more. Because if a wide receiver had 18 touchdowns, I'm pretty sure he'd get whatever money he wanted no matter how old he was. If a quarterback threw for a bunch of yards or threw for a bunch of touchdowns no matter how old he was, he would probably get his money. I want to see what happens with LeGarrette Blount in the situation to see if he's less valued, more valued, basically compare him to people like Adrian Peterson, like what Latavius Murray just got, and kind of see what they value more. See if Adrian Peterson gets more money than he does. It's like, okay, so you just think that the older running back can be good again, and you don't think that getting all those touchdowns was the same kind of thing. With that being said, we're going to, get out of here right now. My name is Anthony. I'd like to thank you for listening to the Golden State Media Concepts podcast. I will be back on Wednesday. Jeremiah, I believe, comes back on Monday. Have a good weekend, guys, and we will talk to you later.
You've been listening to the Golden State Media Concepts Football Podcast, part of the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. You can find this show and others like it at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Download our podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, and Google Play. Just type in GSMC to find all the shows from the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network, from movies to music, from sports to entertainment, and even weird news. You can also follow us on Twitter and on Facebook. Thank you, and we hope you have enjoyed today's program.